So now that I've gone through the hardware philosophy, I'd like to take a bit of time to explain how Knack, the PlayStation 4 title that I'm directing, fits into all of this. One of the issues that I personally faced in 2008 when I began my work as lead system architect was whether or not I should continue working directly on games. And I ended up having a heart-to-heart with Akira Sato, who was chairman of Sony Computer Entertainment at the time. His advice was that quite a lot of my value as architect was because of my game work, and to give up the game work would put me on a path that would reduce my long-term ability to contribute to the organization. So if at all possible, he suggested that I should continue working directly on games. The next question was what I would do on the game titles. I've been working to support creative directors like Ted Price and Jason Rubin in any way that I could, but team size and project complexity kept growing and growing, and that meant that my work had changed from something critical, such as laying out essentially all of the levels in the second Crash Bandicoot game, to something much smaller, such as script doctoring or usability testing on God of War 3 or Killzone 3. What I ultimately decided was to be director on a smaller title. The worldwide studio has a group in Tokyo called the Japan Studio, which has been responsible for Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, Loco Roco, and a number of other game titles over the years. And I knew the group very well because in the PlayStation 3 years, I'd been responsible for transferring technology from the ICE team to the game teams there at the studio. It seemed like a nice fit. Plus, I needed to be in Tokyo every month anyway for the hardware work. Now, what the Japan studio and I chose to make was a character action game with two audiences in mind. One audience was core gamers. I wanted to tap into the nostalgia for the game experiences of the past, that feeling you had when you played Crash Bandicoot or Sonic the Hedgehog for the first time. Crash was actually a brutally difficult game despite its very simple two-button control scheme. So that meant on a hard difficulty setting, our game really needed to challenge the core gamer. The other audience was light or beginner gamers, and I chose this because I have some very specific and personal beliefs about consoles and their position within the world of gaming. Console games can be pretty complex. If we just focus on the controller and the game's control scheme, there are something like 16 buttons on DualShock 3 or DualShock 4 that a game can use, and a typical AAA title will use almost all of them. Now, I'm personally comfortable with that. I started gaming in the era of the Atari 2600, which only had one button, but then I had decades to adjust to the increasing complexity of games as they evolved to the point where they are today. More recently, the children of the 1990s typically started by playing handheld game systems with their simpler controls, and then moved to home consoles. In a sense, the handheld game systems were training them to be console players. But today, the trends are quite different. Young children are playing games on smartphones and tablets, as are many adults who have never played video games before. The ease of interactions with touchscreens is so high that pretty much anyone can play Fruit Ninja on an iPad. So we have this gulf that's developing for many light, young, or beginner players between what they're familiar with when playing a game and what's required to play a modern AAA title. Now, certainly the touchscreen games on Vita and motion-based gaming using the PlayStation camera work to bridge this gap, but I started to think about creating a game that would firmly have a foot in both worlds. By that, I mean a game that was very much a story-driven action-adventure, but at the same time, a game that could act as sort of an on-ramp to the world of console gaming, something that on the easy difficulty setting would be playable by pretty much anyone regardless of their gaming history or habits. So that is the origin of Knack, a game where you can play it on hard for that old school core gamer challenge, but on easy, it can be someone's first console game. Now, it has proved challenging to build that game. Playtests show that much of what we believe has broad accessibility, such as those cute mascot games of years gone by, turn out to be essentially unplayable by light gamers. So our quest to make the on-ramp to the world of console games has taken us to some rather interesting places. And just to give you one example, our testing showed that 8-year-olds have difficulty with the control schemes of many games. The issue was not the complexity of the control scheme as much as simply the size of the controller compared to the size of their hands. So as part of our design process, we ended up making a giant controller. 50% larger than usual, so that we could directly experience what it feels like to be a child playing a game. And we immediately understood that the shoulder buttons are simply out of reach for the typical 8-year-old, but that all the face buttons could be used quite readily. There was, of course, another benefit to wearing the two hats of game director and system architect, which is that it made it easier to speak to the various first and third-party game teams about PlayStation 4. I didn't need to talk as a technologist. I could talk as a game creator with direct experience using the hardware, software, and development environment. So when I went around explaining just how simple the hardware was to work with, that was something I'd seen for myself on Knack, which had had just a skeleton staff of programmers through much of the project. It also made conversations about PlayStation 4 much more concrete. If the topic was support for our play-as-you-download system or support for our new Friends network, I could talk about what I was doing on my game. And since my game was a smaller title, any solutions or strategies I had would usually be simple to adopt by the larger teams.